To date, the United States has poured $65.9 billion into Ukraine's military, making it the top donor by a margin. But newly re-elected Donald Trump seems to want a return on that investment in the form of Ukraine's rare earth minerals, 50% of them. Back in November 2024, Senator Lindsey Graham called the initial mineral pitch a good deal for Ukraine and the US. But Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy doesn't seem to agree. That's why he flat-out rejected the finalized agreement, taking a direct shot at the US in the process. So what made Zelenskyy furious enough to risk future American aid? Let's break it all down. The official offer and the rejection might have come in February 2025, but this battle has been brewing even before Trump won re-election. Ukraine had long been weighing its options, knowing a second Trump term could mean tougher demands and fewer handouts. After all, this is the same man who questioned US aid to Ukraine and vowed to end the war in 24 hours. And let's not pretend Trump and Ukraine have ever been on good terms. His first impeachment, sparked by allegations he pressured Zelenskyy to investigate Hunter Biden, former President Joe Biden's son. Then there's his perceived softness for Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who he even called a genius and savvy for invading Ukraine. So you can't really blame Ukraine for trying to find ways to stay in Trump's good graces, because let's face it, the future of the country depends on this. That's why Ukraine was actually the one to pitch a mineral deal first. That's right, it didn't start with Trump. It was actually inspired by US investors with serious political connections expressing interest in Ukraine's underground wealth in late 2023. A consortium led by TechMet, a firm partly owned by the US government, and Ronald S. Lauder, a longtime Trump ally, had their eyes on Ukraine's lithium reserves in particular. In fact, Lauder had been pushing this idea for years, quietly lobbying Kyiv and Washington. If the name sounds familiar to you, it should. Lauder was the same guy who planted the idea of buying Greenland in Trump's head. And while he insists he never spoke to Trump directly about Ukraine's minerals, he definitely made sure the right people were listening. So when Ukraine started floating a resource deal to keep the US support flowing, it wasn't exactly out of nowhere. The plan took shape somewhere around the fall of 2024. Ukraine planned to target Trump's business mindset, emphasizing not just the morality of its fight, but also the economic opportunities for minerals like lithium and titanium, which are key ingredients for electric batteries. These were no commodities, they were true power plays. It all came together in September 2024. Zelenskyy met Trump in New York, and the pitch was simple. Ukraine could become the best business partner the US has ever dreamed of. That's exactly how Senator Graham previously described the country. So in this new game, Ukraine wasn't begging for support. Instead, the country was offering a business deal. And Trump, he was listening. He knew American interests aligned with this vision. By October 2024, things heated up. Ukraine's victory plan was in full motion, targeting not just military aid, but a deal that could secure the country's future. This plan included a minerals deal, which was an obvious sell to the US. Obvious, but also a no-brainer, as John E. Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine, called it. This brings us to December 2024, when Ukrainian officials led by Yulia Sviridenko, the economy minister, made waves in Washington. They pitched production licenses for critical minerals, detailing that Ukraine could meet US and European Union demand for titanium for the next 25 years. To back this up, Zelenskyy even flew 1,500 miles to meet with Trump in Paris, confirming Ukraine's commitment. Zelenskyy previously delayed signing the deal with the Biden administration to allow Trump to claim the credit. He was playing the long game, and it looked like it was working. In early February, Trump was ready to make his move. From the Oval Office, he made his intentions clear. We're looking to do a deal with Ukraine, where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earths and other things. So the deal was officially on the table, US aid in exchange for minerals. Of course, Trump's transactional approach was no surprise to anyone. This was the man who'd used economic power to pressure allies like Colombia and Mexico. Now it's Ukraine's turn. But why are we using the word pressure? Isn't this deal exactly what Ukraine wanted? After all, Zelenskyy pulled out all the stops to secure it. He flattered, traveled, lobbied through powerful allies, and positioned Ukraine as a goldmine for resources Trump could leverage. Well, the problem is that the official offer wasn't exactly what Zelenskyy wanted for Ukraine, as you'll soon understand why. Let's start with when the official offer came about. Wednesday, February 12, 2025. That's when Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary under Trump, met with Zelenskyy. But they didn't meet at a conference in a European country. No, they met in Ukraine, and this was a historic visit. It marked the first time a senior Trump administration official had set foot in Ukraine since Trump's return to the White House. But the visit wasn't a simple friendly gesture. It was about business. That's why Trump chose Bessent for this visit in the first place. He could have sent a senior military or security figure, but he didn't. He sent a financial expert with 40 years of experience in global investment and finance, and he sent him to seal the deal. But the deal in question asked for half of Ukraine's natural resources, a jaw-dropping demand considering the stakes. But Bessent, speaking for Trump, framed it as a quid pro quo, access to minerals in exchange for continued military support. So yes, this was about leverage, but not in the way Zelenskyy had imagined when he started his charm offensive. But as you'll soon find out, the amount of minerals, those 50% we keep referring to, was the least of Ukraine's worries. Though this is still a huge deal, so let's break it down. Ukraine's mineral wealth isn't just a footnote in the global race for resources. No, we're talking about a land that's home to 117 out of 120 critical minerals, and each of these holds the keys to modern industry, everything from electric cars to renewable energy. And guess who desperately needs these minerals? The US, of course. The US has been sweating over its mineral dependence for a while now, especially as competition heats up with China and Russia. The 2022 list of critical minerals from the US Geological Survey mentions 50 minerals as essential for the country's national security and economic strength. Among them, you'll find the following. 1. Lithium. The US needs lithium to stay competitive in the electric vehicle revolution, yet the US produces barely 2% of the world's lithium. 2. Titanium. The US uses titanium to manufacture everything from aerospace parts to military equipment. Currently, a large portion of the US's titanium comes from countries like Russia and China, both increasingly unreliable partners. And 3. Uranium. With nuclear power playing a key role in the clean energy transition, the US relies heavily on uranium. Currently, it imports nearly 95% of its supply, and before restrictions were imposed in 2023, a significant portion came from Russia. Now let's travel to Ukraine and see how this country is doing with these critical minerals. When it comes to lithium, Ukraine has 1/3 of all Europe's reserves. That's approximately 3% of the global lithium reserves. As for titanium, Ukraine holds Europe's largest reserves. We're talking 7% of the total supply of titanium in the world. This makes it a true goldmine for the US, which is seeking more supply to fuel its defense and tech industries. Then there's uranium. Ukraine dominates here too, with the largest assessed uranium reserves in Europe. And these three are just the beginning. Ukraine houses a total of 109 critical raw materials deposits. Besides 46 titanium deposits and 2 lithium deposits, this number also includes 34 polymetallic deposits and 11 graphite deposits. Graphite, for instance, is a key material for batteries and fuel cells. So as the electric car vehicle market booms, Ukraine's graphite deposits become even more critical globally. But just how much is all of this worth? According to SecDev, a global leader in digital and cyber intelligence specializing in OSINT and AI-driven systems, the total worth of Ukraine's mineral reserves is estimated to be over $26 trillion. This is the kind of wealth that can transform a nation and alter the course of global markets. So when the US demands 50% of Ukraine's mineral resources, it's not exactly asking for some stones in the ground. It's potentially asking for trillions of dollars. However, it should also be noted that the value of these minerals isn't so cut and dry. These aren't just shiny rocks waiting to be picked up and sold. There are huge complexities and obstacles tied to the extraction, processing, and geopolitical risks that complicate this potential windfall. Let's start with the first and most obvious obstacle: Russia. You see, roughly half of Ukraine's mineral wealth is currently under Russian control. It's obvious that the US isn't the only country to recognize the value these minerals hold. No, Russia is also taking a hands-on approach and grabbing everything it can get its hands on. And this aggressive grab came quite early in the invasion. Almost instantly, Russia made quite a dent in Ukraine's natural reserves by seizing 41 coal fields, 27 natural gas sites, 14 propane sites, 9 oil fields, 6 iron ore deposits, 2 titanium ore sites, 2 zirconium ore sites, 1 strontium site, 1 lithium site, 1 uranium site, 1 gold deposit, and a significant quarry of limestone used for Ukrainian steel production. That's quite a list, a $12.4 trillion list to be exact. This list meant that Russia controlled 63% of Ukraine's coal deposits, 11% of oil, 20% of natural gas, 42% of metals, and 33% of rare earth and critical minerals. And most of these are still in Russian hands. Add it up and you get an uncomfortable chunk of Ukraine's mineral wealth being actively mined, stored, and potentially weaponized for Russia's benefit. But as problematic as Russia is, it's not the only issue. Ukraine's mineral reserves are also not easily accessible, well, at least not all of them. Some are in hard-to-reach areas or require further exploration to determine their full potential. So while we're throwing around trillion-dollar figures, some of those resources of the future are still under the ground and can be hard to access without significant investment, time, and effort. and that's assuming Russia doesn't swoop in first. There's also the issue of Ukraine's regulations and insider dealing. Simply put, Ukraine's regulations are outdated and complicated, making the business climate a nightmare for investors. Plus, corruption and cronyism have run rampant in the country for years. This has made foreign investors wary of unfair competition and secret deals that could eat into potential returns. This also explains why few investors were interested in Ukraine's mineral deposits despite their huge value even before the war. So let's say Ukraine overlooks the amount of minerals the US is asking for. After all, it's not like foreign investors are exactly lining up to snatch up these resources, especially now. Even then, the deal offered to Zelenskyy wouldn't be signed. Why? Because Trump isn't only asking for minerals, he also wants other natural resources. The US is asking for half of everything: minerals, oil, gas, and any profits from new extraction licenses. These earnings are crucial, especially because Ukraine's state-owned oil and gas giant Naftogaz is raking in cash. In the first half of 2024 alone, Naftogaz reported a net profit of a whopping 24.4 billion Ukrainian hryvnias. That's almost $587 million based on 2025 currency rates. And that's almost 4 times the profit from the same period the previous year. Talk about a juicy chunk of change for the US. But believe it or not, even this isn't the main reason Zelenskyy turned down Trump's deal. We're getting to that now. You know how everyone kept referring to half of Ukraine's minerals as an incentive for the US to keep sending aid to Ukraine? Well, that message got a little blurry somewhere along the way. On February 16th, Besant referred to these minerals as payback for the aid the US had given to Ukraine. Another 2 Trump officials echoed this sentiment, suggesting that the minerals were meant as compensation for the billions in military and financial assistance the US had sent to Kyiv since the war's start. Instead of Ukraine simply cutting a check for aid, the idea was that the ownership of these critical resources would serve as a form of reimbursement. It's like trading in your car to cover your credit card bill, except the car happens to be trillions of dollars worth of minerals. So it became increasingly clear that Trump, too, saw these mineral deposits as an overdue payment to the US. Nothing more, nothing less. He told Fox News explicitly that he wanted the equivalent of like $500 billion worth of rare minerals from Ukraine. He even claimed that Ukraine had essentially agreed to do that. But Trump certainly spoke too soon. Feeling overconfident, he offered Zelenskyy a deal that reportedly included no security guarantees for Ukraine. And that's the main reason Zelenskyy rejected it. It wasn't because he didn't want to give the minerals. Ukraine had long been open to leveraging its vast resources, but because the deal was completely one-sided. Zelenskyy emphasized that the deal didn't address the critical question: what happens to these valuable mineral deposits if Russian forces decide to invade again? So Zelensky's rejection wasn't just about minerals. It was about ensuring Ukraine's future survival. As he explained, "I didn't let the ministers sign a relevant agreement because, in my view, it's not ready to protect us, our interests." Now, it's not hard to guess the kind of security guarantees Zelenskyy would have preferred. After all, this has been his long-term goal for Ukraine: a NATO membership. In Zelensky's eyes, this membership is the only thing that can deter future Russian threats. That's why the victory plan we mentioned earlier also included it. For Zelenskyy, it was always about securing the protection of Ukraine's sovereignty through NATO. But this time, the US seemed more focused on its own interests, and these certainly don't include the long-term security guarantees Ukraine craves. So while Trump's offer might have seemed promising for his relations with Ukraine, Zelenskyy saw it for what it was: a deal that offered Ukraine little more than a temporary solution to its immediate problems, without addressing the existential security threats that could undo it all in a heartbeat. But Zelensky's fury wasn't just a reaction to a broken deal. It was the culmination of trust shattered and promises ignored. Just imagine standing in the ruins of a country that once gave up its nuclear arsenal, an arsenal that could have kept its people safe, and realizing that the very powers that had pledged to protect you were now willing to let you fall. You see, in 1994, Ukraine made the agonizing decision to disarm. It relinquished its vast stockpile of nuclear weapons, the 3rd largest in the world at the time, on the solemn promise of security assurances from the US, the UK, and other major powers. But when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and then waged a full-scale invasion, the world did nothing. The very agreement that was meant to protect Ukraine, the Budapest Memorandum, was left gathering dust. The US and the UK stood by as Russia marched across Ukraine's borders, and no one lifted a finger to stop it. Where was the protection Ukraine had been promised? Where were the security assurances? Now Zelenskyy faced yet another proposal from the US government. But this time, it was not just a military failure, it was an economic one. Zelenskyy had fought tooth and nail to defend his country, and this proposal was an insult. He was being asked to give up half of Ukraine's mineral resources in exchange for vague promises that didn't address the real, existential threat Russia poses. No security guarantees, no assurances that Russia wouldn't strike again once a ceasefire was reached. Just a temporary deal that ignored the one thing that mattered: Ukraine's survival. What makes it worse is how excited Zelenskyy initially felt about this deal. Prior to welcoming Besant to Ukraine, Zelenskyy spoke with palpable hope as he addressed his nation. He was enthusiastic about the discussions that would soon follow. He referred to the deal as a detailed plan for a strategic partnership between the two countries, one that would bring vital investments into Ukraine's vast natural resources and, in turn, bolster the economy during a war that seemed endless. There was an air of optimism as he thanked President Trump for his message of support and expressed confidence in Trump's ability to push back against Putin. Zelenskyy seemed to believe that this deal could be the breakthrough Ukraine needed, that it could bring not only the financial aid Ukraine desperately required, but also the political momentum to end the war. He was optimistic that a document could be finalized at the Munich Security Conference, which took place from February 14th to 16th. "We will do everything so that our teams can quickly agree and sign this document," he told reporters. It was a rare moment of hope for a leader whose country had been battered by 3 years of conflict. But as we now know, the deal wasn't signed. The hopefulness that Zelenskyy felt in those early days was soon replaced by the bitter sting of betrayal. Unsurprisingly, the White House didn't see this rejection the same way. A senior White House official, Brian Hughes from the National Security Council, practically blamed Zelenskyy for missing out on an excellent opportunity. According to Hughes, the US had presented Ukraine with a deal that would have been a win-win, a chance for American taxpayers to recoup the money sent to Ukraine while helping grow Ukraine's own economy. But what about Ukraine's security? Well, Hughes argued that binding economic ties with the US would be the best guarantee against future aggression and part of a lasting peace. He added that both the US and Russia recognize this and that Zelenskyy is being short-sighted for failing to do so as well. However, European diplomats seemingly took Zelenskyy's side in the matter, voicing concerns that went beyond simple economics. They saw this offer as a reminder of colonialism, an era when powerful Western nations exploited smaller, weaker countries for their own gain. To them, this wasn't just a business deal, it was a dangerous precedent. Konstantin Yelysyev, a former Ukrainian diplomat, was particularly vocal in his opposition. He warned that the deal as it stood played directly into Russia's hands. If Ukraine were to relinquish control of its valuable natural resources in exchange for US support, it could provide the perfect propaganda tool for Moscow, casting the war as one driven by greed for resources rather than fighting for Ukrainian independence or democracy. The message would be dangerously distorted, painting Ukraine not as a sovereign nation defending itself, but as a pawn in a global scramble for wealth. As Yelysyev put it, it's more important to say this is about protecting democracies and defeating Putin. After all, Ukraine's fight was always about standing firm in the face of a tyrannical regime and asserting its right to exist as an independent, democratic nation. But the US doesn't seem to see it that way. Senator Graham, a Republican ally of Trump, encapsulated the transaction-focused rhetoric that came to dominate the conversation in Washington with 5 chilling words. The war is about money. And now, just days ago, on February 23rd, 2025, Zelenskyy made it official. He flat-out rejected Trump's demand for $500 billion in mineral rights. He didn't mince words, reminding the US that its aid had been given as grants, not debts, and refusing to let Ukraine's resources become a form of repayment. So what next? Where do we go from here? Well, the negotiations, though tense, are far from over. One potential development that's been talked about is the idea that the US would reinvest a portion of the profits from mineral exports into Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. Other ideas include providing loans for Ukraine's military equipment and using the minerals as collateral. The road ahead might be rocky, however there are clear avenues that could offer Ukraine both economic benefits and stronger security guarantees.